I want you to imagine the perfect life. Not a fairy tale, but the kind of solid, comfortable happiness you see in magazines, or at least the kind I thought I had. I'm Amelia, 42 years old, two beautiful kids, Ethan, who's 12, and little Chloe, 6, and a husband, David, who was, until recently, my anchor. David is a successful architect, a devoted dad, and the man I'd built a life with over 2 decades. Our suburban home, the kind with the wraparound porch and the freshly mowed lawn, felt like an impenetrable fortress of normalcy. And then Isabella walked into it. She was the babysitter, not a flighty teenager, but a poised, incredibly capable 20-year-old. She came to us through a referral from one of the moms in the school district, rave reviews about her maturity and her calm demeanor. We needed someone reliable. My firm was going through a stressful merger, and David's projects were demanding all his attention. We interviewed 3 candidates, but Isabella stood out instantly. She was quiet, almost ethereal, with an unnerving confidence. She had this pale, haunting beauty and eyes that seemed to hold a secret, a depth I initially mistook for intelligence. I remember that first interview vividly. David was impressed. She's focused, Amelia. Not glued to her phone like the others. She seems to genuinely like the kids. Ethan, usually sullen and resistant to new caregivers, was actually engaged, showing her his latest Lego monstrosity. Chloe, our little social butterfly, was curled up on Isabella's lap within 20 minutes, completely smitten. It felt like a sign, a cosmic nod that we'd finally found our savior. We hired her on the spot. For the first few months, Isabella was everything we needed. She was punctual to the second, always had healthy snacks prepared, and helped Ethan with his complicated algebra homework. Our house ran smoother than it had in years. David and I even started having regular date nights again, feeling completely guilt-free, because we knew the kids were not just watched, but genuinely cared for. But slowly, subtly, things began to shift. It started with small things I initially dismissed as paranoia or work-related stress. Isabella became too integrated. She stopped leaving immediately after we got home. She'd linger, suggesting a new organizational system for the pantry or offering to prep our dinner for the next day. Sometimes I'd walk into the living room and find her sitting on the sofa, simply watching David from across the room while he worked on his laptop. The gaze wasn't creepy or suggestive. It was intense, almost sorrowful. It made me uneasy. One Tuesday, I came home early, completely exhausted. I opened the door quietly and heard music coming from the kitchen. It wasn't the kids' upbeat pop music. It was a soulful, slightly obscure jazz piece that David and I used to listen to in college, a specific track from a musician nobody under the age of 35 would recognize. Isabella was humming along while kneading dough for bread, a task I never asked her to do. Isabella? That's a deep cut. Where did you hear that song? I asked, leaning against the door frame. She didn't jump. She simply turned, that faint, polite smile on her face. Oh, I just heard it on a playlist, Amelia. It's lovely, isn't it? It is, I said, but the answer felt rehearsed, too smooth. David was obsessed with that particular jazz artist. I looked over at the counter and saw a small framed photo. It was a picture of me, David, Ethan, and Chloe from our last family vacation. Isabella had moved it from my bedside table to the kitchen counter. Why? I didn't press it. I told myself she was just an overly sentimental young woman, but the incidents became more frequent, more personal. Isabella started dressing like me. Not copying my outfits, but adopting my style. The simple, expensive silk blouses, the specific cut of tailored jeans. My favorite brand of perfume, one David bought for me every anniversary, started smelling faintly on her cashmere sweater when I hugged her goodbye. Then came the notebooks. David has this habit of doodling when he's on long conference calls. Architectural sketches, geometric patterns, sometimes just names. He usually keeps his notebooks in his study. One Sunday, I found one of his spiral notebooks tucked into the cushion of the armchair in our sunroom. I picked it up to put it away. It wasn't his, it was Isabella's. I shouldn't have opened it, I know, but the unease had festered into a knot of cold dread in my stomach. I had to see. The pages weren't filled with typical 20-year-old musings. There were detailed observations about David's habits. He drinks Earl Grey exactly at 7:30 a.m., doesn't take sugar. He rubs his temple when he's frustrated just like Grandpa used to. Below that, there were dense, perfectly formed paragraphs. They weren't about me or the kids. They were about her mother. The handwriting was beautiful, almost calligraphic. One entry caught my eye. She still doesn't know. Not about the money, not about the promise, and certainly not about the child he sent away. It's all here, waiting. I was shaking. Who was she? Her mother. My mother-in-law. And what was waiting? A child he sent away? My mind immediately went to David's brief, painful marriage before me, which ended in annulment before we met. Maybe there was a child from that, a secret he'd never shared, but the text felt more current, more insidious. I put the notebook back exactly where I found it, my hands clammy. I knew in that moment that this wasn't just an awkward, over-involved babysitter. This was surveillance. The following Friday, I told David I was worried about Isabella's boundaries. I downplayed the notebook. I couldn't admit I'd snooped, and focused on the lingering, the personal touches, the inappropriate familiarity. David's reaction was immediate and strangely defensive. Amelia, she's fantastic with the kids. She's organized. You're stressed about the merger. Don't go looking for problems where there aren't any. She's just a dedicated young woman trying to make a living. Dedicated to what, David? To our life? The sharpness in my voice surprised both of us. He sighed, running a hand through his hair. Look, let's just keep her until the merger is over. We need the help. Then we can reevaluate. Okay? I conceded, but the fear didn't leave. It grew sharper, more focused. My marriage, which had always felt like granite, now had hairline fractures visible everywhere. David was protecting her. Why? The final terrifying piece of the puzzle arrived 2 weeks later. It wasn't a note in a notebook. It was a small, crudely drawn map left on David's desk, tucked beneath a stack of blueprints. It showed an old, overgrown playground near a derelict hospital on the far side of town, a place David had mentioned visiting years ago, saying he'd briefly worked on a pro bono project there, long before we were married. Next to the drawing was a single typed sentence, placed deliberately by the keyboard. Ask David about the girl he left on the bench 20 years ago, the one who grew up. My blood ran cold. 20 years ago. That was before Ethan, before Chloe, even before our wedding. And David hadn't left a girl. He'd abandoned a child. I stared at the map, then at the sentence. The realization hit me with the force of a physical blow, leaving me breathless and dizzy. The intense gaze, the matching jazz music, the way she watched him, the sorrow in her eyes, the revenge hinted at in her notebook. Isabella wasn't just a babysitter. She was his daughter. the one he never told me about. And she was here for a reason that had absolutely nothing to do with babysitting. I crumpled the note in my hand. It felt hot, toxic. The map and the single devastating sentence. Ask David about the girl he left on the bench 20 years ago, the one who grew up, were proof of a betrayal so deep it threatened to collapse everything I knew. 20 years ago, David would have been 22. A young man barely starting his career, certainly not the devoted family man he was now. The timeline fit with Isabella's age. The math was sickeningly simple. I stood there in the silent study, the scent of David's expensive cologne now smelling like a lie. I needed to confront him, to scream, to break things. But something stopped me. The note was Isabella's move. It was her checkmate. If I confronted David directly, I would be playing her game, on her terms. I needed to understand the scope of the deception before I detonated my life. I spent the next 2 days in a silent, icy panic. I watched Isabella closely. She was still the perfect caregiver, perhaps even more attentive. She baked cookies with Chloe and helped Ethan finish a complicated science project. She moved through my house with the confidence of someone who felt they had a right to be there, a right earned through abandonment and now through vengeance. During those days, David was oblivious. He was busy, stressed, affectionate in his distracted way. But every time he interacted with Isabella, a passing compliment on her organization, a casual question about her classes, I felt the vibration of the lie between them. Did he know? Was he consciously letting his secret daughter into our home, or was he truly blind? I decided to start my own investigation. The note mentioned a hospital and a bench, David's pro bono project. I remembered him saying he had done some low-cost design work for an old community center near a derelict hospital years ago. That was my starting point. I told David I had an all-day off-site meeting for the merger. I dropped the kids at school, called my boss to smooth over my absence, and drove straight to the location shown on the crude map. It took me over an hour to find it. A forgotten corner of the city, lined with abandoned industrial buildings and a vast, empty lot where an old general hospital used to stand. The community center David had mentioned was still there, but dilapidated. I parked and approached a small, surprisingly well-maintained park bench tucked under a sprawling ancient oak tree. This had to be the bench. I sat down, feeling the cold metal beneath me. 20 years ago. What happened here? I pulled out my phone and started digging. I searched public records, local news archives, anything related to that area 20 years prior. The internet was a wealth of archived sorrow. I found an old, faded newspaper article, a tiny mention on an obscure local website. It detailed the temporary closure of the General Hospital's youth shelter due to funding cuts. The article included a short human interest piece about the shelter's residents. I scanned the names, the dates, the heartbreaking stories of struggling young people. And there it was, a name. Not Isabella's, but a name that cracked my facade of calm, Claire Thompson. The article said Claire was a young, unwed mother who had been relying on the shelter while trying to finish high school. She'd given birth to a daughter shortly before the shelter closed. The article ended abruptly, simply noting that Claire and her child had disappeared shortly after the closure, and police had briefly investigated an abandonment case near the park. My heart hammered against my ribs. I immediately searched for Claire Thompson. The search led me to an obituary from about 3 years ago. Claire Thompson, aged 37, cause of death, a sudden, aggressive illness. She'd been living alone in a small apartment miles away, working minimum wage jobs. And then I found the final piece of digital evidence. A digitized birth certificate request filed 3 years prior, just after Claire's death. The mother's name was Claire Thompson. The daughter's name, listed on the request, was Isabella Thompson. The father's name field was blank, but the address listed for the informant on the request form, the person verifying the details, was an address I knew intimately. It was the address of the law firm David had worked for right out of college, the one he had mentioned doing the pro bono work for. It wasn't just that he was the father, it was the calculated cruelty of it. He must have known Claire had died. He must have known Isabella was now alone. I drove home, my thoughts racing faster than the speed limit. David hadn't abandoned a baby 20 years ago. He had abandoned the mother who was forced to raise his child alone. And then, after she died, he had tracked Isabella down. Not to welcome her into our life, but to monitor her, to keep her silent. I remembered Isabella's notebook entry. She still doesn't know. Not about the money, not about the promise, and certainly not about the child he sent away. It's all here, waiting, the money, the promise. I arrived home just as the kids were coming back from soccer practice. Isabella was there helping Chloe with her shin guards. She looked up and met my eyes. Her expression was unreadable, but I saw a flicker, not of malice, but of recognition. She knew I had been digging. That night, I waited until David was asleep. I didn't want the confrontation. I wanted the truth that he was hiding. I went into his study and opened his secure personal safe, the one he thought only he knew the combination to. It was our first anniversary date, a detail he'd forgotten I still remembered. Inside, there wasn't cash or jewelry. There was a thin, legal-sized manila envelope. My hands were shaking so badly I almost dropped it. The contents were far worse than I had imagined. First, a series of monthly wire transfer receipts dating back 3 years made out to Claire Thompson's address. They stopped abruptly on the date of her death. The amounts were small, almost insulting, just enough to cover basic rent, David's hush money. Second, a formal notarized document, an official legal agreement signed by David and Claire Thompson 20 years ago. The document stipulated that in exchange for a one-time lump sum, which he clearly never delivered, opting for small monthly payments instead, Claire would waive all parental and financial claims against David. It was a cold, brutal contract. He had purchased her silence. But the final item was the darkest. It was a single laminated piece of paper. Not a contract, but a letter, typed and signed by David just 6 months ago, after Claire's death, when Isabella was 18. It wasn't a loving acknowledgement. It was a threat. It stated that if Isabella ever attempted to contact his family or reveal the truth of their connection, David would use his legal connections and financial power to ensure she received absolutely nothing and that her mother's memory would be publicly disgraced. He was effectively blackmailing his own daughter into silence. My entire body went numb. This wasn't the man I married. This was a calculating, cold-hearted monster who used his legal knowledge to victimize a young woman and then terrorize the orphan daughter he created. I stood there, the documents fanned out on his desk, illuminated by the cold glow of the moon. I knew what I had to do. I needed to bring the pieces together. My discovery, Isabella's notes, David's documents. The time for silent investigation was over. It was time for the retribution Isabella had been meticulously planning. I lay next to David in our ridiculously large, comfortable bed that night, but sleep was a stranger. My eyes were fixed on the ceiling, my mind replaying the sequence of horrific events and the documents I'd retrieved from David's safe. Those papers felt less like love letters and more like a death warrant. The death warrant for our marriage. I understood it all now. Isabella must have learned of David's existence after Claire died. Maybe she found those paltry, insulting wire transfer receipts among her mother's belongings. Or worse, the hideous letter of threat David had sent her. Isabella coming to us as a babysitter was not a coincidence. It was a calculated scheme of revenge, and I had unknowingly become an accessory to my own downfall. She had infiltrated our home through me. She had approached David by first gaining my trust. The fear and horror I felt towards her slowly began to morph into a cold, respectful solidarity. She was the child my husband had abandoned 20 years ago. I was the foolish wife who had lived 20 years married to a monster without knowing it. I woke up before the alarm, alert. David was sleeping soundly, looking utterly innocent. That mask of innocence made my stomach clench. I went through my routine, showered, made my coffee, but every movement was calculated. Isabella arrived precisely at 9 a.m. I informed her that instead of going to the office, I would be working from home. David was cheerful as he left for his critical meeting. "Have a productive day, Amelia. Call me after the meeting. Take care, Isabella." "Of course, David." "Have a good day," Isabella replied, her voice smooth and respectful as usual. But her eyes were fixed on me. She knew something had changed. As David's car turned the corner, I quietly closed the front door. Ethan was at school. Chloe was engrossed in a cartoon. The atmosphere was charged with the silence preceding an explosion. Isabella was in the kitchen, prepping snacks. I watched her from behind. Her shoulders seemed more tense than usual. "Isabella," I said, deliberately keeping my voice low and neutral. She slowly placed the vegetable knife on the counter. She turned. The mask was off. The deep, sorrowful look in her eyes was now sharper, more calculating. "Amelia," she responded. A moment of silence swallowed all the air in the room. "I saw the documents in David's safe last night," I stated, cutting straight to the chase. I didn't hesitate. I had nothing left to lose. Not a flicker of surprise crossed Isabella's face. She simply tilted her head slightly. It was an acknowledgement, a chilling confirmation. "I also saw the note you left for me, the map of the park bench and the sentence," I continued. "The girl abandoned 20 years ago, Claire Thompson's daughter, you." "I am," she confirmed. Just one word, cold, precise, and devoid of emotion, just like David's legal contract. "Why?" I whispered. The tremble in my voice frustrated me, but I couldn't stop it. "Why did you do this? Why come into my home? What do you want from me?" Isabella leaned against the counter. Her gaze softened for the first time, but it wasn't pity. It was a bitter acceptance. "I don't want anything from you, Amelia. I want to take everything back from him. The only reason I came to you was to destroy the one thing he values most, the image of this perfect life, from the inside." "Does David know who you are?" I asked. "No. My father believes he found me after my mother died, threatened me into silence, and offered me a small stipend. He believes I took his hush money, but I never accepted it. I came here for a job, Amelia, not to be part of his life." And what is this job? Is this revenge, Isabella, or complicity? "This is justice, Amelia," she said fiercely. "My mother lived in poverty for 20 years because of David, and after she died, I read the threatening letters from his safe. This house, these cars, this title, they were all built upon the suffering my mother endured." She moved closer to me. Only the kitchen island separated us. David even fabricated the references needed to hire me. He was so obsessed with finding the perfect caregiver for you that he essentially pushed me onto your doorstep. He thought keeping me close meant he could control me. That was his biggest mistake. He thought he was in control while I was learning all your vulnerabilities, all your routines. I saw exactly how fragile your perfect marriage truly was. In that moment, I realized Isabella was not just a babysitter, but the living manifestation of David's repressed guilt. He had invited his worst enemy into his inner sanctum, believing he was protecting himself. "Why did you leave the note for me?" I asked, my voice quivering again. "Why did you want me to know?" Isabella's answer surprised me, because not only is he living a lie, but you are too. And this revenge cannot just be about destroying him. I have to destroy him in your eyes, in his children's eyes. And you need to help me. Why would I help you? Because the only thing David stole from me wasn't just his fatherhood, she said, swallowing hard. Her eyes drifted towards the window, to the garden where the children played. My mother's fatal illness was not a coincidence. She was too young, and the doctors attributed it to stress, poor nutrition, and 2 decades of grinding poverty. David orphaned me while stealing my mother's life, and now he will pay the price for all those stolen years. You, by staying married to him, will pay the price for your lost dignity. Isabella produced the letter David had used to threaten her and a few faded photographs of Claire's impoverished life before her death. I don't think David anticipated that copies of these documents and pictures would be buried somewhere. I am his contingency plan. I have all the details needed to press not just financial fraud charges against David, but also a case for abuse of power and legal harassment against a poor woman. You plan to ruin David's career and reputation. That is only the start. I will force everyone, his colleagues, your family, to know the man he truly is. If you help me, you can emerge from this wreckage clean with your children. If you try to resist, he will not just destroy your marriage. He will leave you buried beneath the rubble. I made my decision right then. This man couldn't be my husband. This man was the greatest mistake of my 20-year life. "What do I need to do, Isabella?" I asked. The trembling was gone. Only a cold, steely resolve remained. Isabella's face held a small, triumphant smile for the first time. "David has a business dinner tonight, 9 p.m. We are going to make sure that will be David's last business dinner." The air in the kitchen was thick with conspiracy. After my question, "What do I need to do, Isabella?" the transaction felt complete. I was no longer the victimized wife. I was an accomplice in the dismantling of my own marriage, and astonishingly, I felt empowered. The fear was replaced by a righteous, cold fury against the man sleeping next to me. Isabella laid out the plan with the precision of a seasoned operative. She didn't use flowery language or emotional appeals. She spoke in clear, actionable steps, detailing David's vulnerabilities and the exact leverage she possessed. David believes he is going to a private dinner tonight with Mr. Henderson, the CEO of the firm he's trying to merge with. Isabella began, her voice low. He will be preparing a detailed presentation on his vision for the new combined architectural firm. That vision is based heavily on proprietary data stolen from his previous firm, which is a felony, but his ultimate downfall is much simpler. "The documents from the safe," I asked, nodding toward David's study. "Those are the bomb, but we need to make sure the right people are in the room when it detonates," she corrected. "He is hosting the dinner at the executive suite of the Grand Hotel. You will call the hotel concierge. Tell them your husband is having a surprise birthday dinner and that you've arranged for a private photographer to document the special occasion at 9:15 p.m. A photographer? Not just any photographer. I have a contact, a freelance investigative journalist who specializes in white-collar crime. He owes me a favor. He will arrive precisely at 9:15 p.m., pretending to be a birthday photographer. He will carry a small, high-quality audio recorder, and his job is simple: capture the shock." My role was crucial. I needed to act normal, almost overly affectionate, to ensure David remained complacent and distracted. I had to plant the seed of doubt, making sure he was already slightly off balance when the journalist arrived. "Before you leave for your date night, you must ask David about the Thompson file. Casually. Make it sound like you stumbled across a cryptic old folder in the garage," Isabella instructed. "His reaction will tell you if he knows what's coming. It will also break his concentration for the night." The next few hours were an exercise in performative normalcy. I picked up Chloe from school, helped Ethan with his piano practice. Every time David called from the office, I was sugary sweet, reminding him how proud I was of his career success. I felt like a spy in my own home. When David came home at 6 p.m., the tension was unbearable. He was impeccably dressed, full of the high energy of a man on the cusp of a major professional victory. "Darling, you look incredible," he said, kissing me on the forehead. "Wish me luck tonight. This deal changes everything for us." I forced a smile. "I know, honey. Just remember to be yourself." As he adjusted his cufflink, I delivered Isabella's line, casually. "Oh, David, while cleaning the garage this morning, I found this ancient cardboard box. It had old legal docs written on it. I saw a file tab that said Thompson. Does that ring a bell? Should I just toss it?" I kept my hand steady as I handed him his briefcase. The effect was instantaneous and satisfyingly volatile. The color drained from David's face. His hands froze on the leather strap of his briefcase. "Thompson?" he repeated, his voice cracking slightly. No, Amelia, don't throw anything out. That's from a very old, sensitive pro bono case. Just leave it. I'll handle it when I get back." He was visibly shaking, the high of his professional triumph evaporating. He knows. He didn't just abandon a secret, he actively feared its resurfacing. "Sure, honey." "Good luck tonight," I chirped, closing the door behind him. I immediately went to the study and made the call to the hotel concierge, adopting the breathless, excited tone of a doting wife. "Yes, Mr. Henderson's assistant helped me arrange it. A complete surprise for David's 44th. The photographer will be asking for the architecture vision dinner. Just send him right in at 9:15, please." Then I went to Isabella. She was in her room, packed. "It's done." He's shaken. "The photographer is booked," I reported. "Excellent," Isabella said, zipping her small backpack. "I am leaving now, Amelia." My work here is finished. I have already sent the journalist the exact documents from the safe and the detailed narrative. He just needs David's live, unscripted reaction. "Wait," I said, my voice catching. "What happens now? To me? To the kids?" Isabella looked at me, her eyes, the eyes of David's abandoned child, surprisingly clear and devoid of malice. "The reporter knows you are the one who facilitated the truth being revealed. He will protect your identity. You will be seen as the victim, the wife who finally learned the truth about the monster she married. File for divorce tomorrow. Use those documents. David will be too busy fighting felony charges and civil suits to fight you for custody or assets." She stepped closer, a ghost walking out of my life. "You are free now, Amelia. You have your children and your conscience. He has his lies. This is my only revenge, that he loses everything, especially the perfection he built over the wreckage of my mother's life." She walked out the back door, disappearing into the evening gloom. The silence she left behind was deafening. I spent the next 2 hours pacing, watching the clock tick towards 9:15 p.m. The kids were upstairs asleep, protected from the imminent explosion. At 9:10 p.m., I cracked open a bottle of wine. At 9:30 p.m., my phone buzzed. It was a text message from the journalist, just 3 words. "Got the reaction." Then a flurry of phone calls started. David's business partner, Mr. Henderson's panicked assistant. I let them all go to voicemail. Finally, at 10:15 p.m., David's number flashed on my screen. I answered. His voice was hoarse, unrecognizable, a terrifying blend of rage and absolute terror. "Amelia, what did you do? What did you tell that man? They canceled the merger. They called the police. They have the contracts. How could you—" I cut him off, my voice steady, cold, and final. "I didn't tell him anything, David." "Your daughter did, and now I'm done. Don't come home." The world didn't end when I told David not to come home, but his world certainly did. The shock of the exposure had paralyzed him. His voice on the phone, a blend of fury and terror, had been the sound of an empire crumbling. "Don't come home," I had repeated, my voice steady. "I know everything, David." "Your daughter told me I'm done." After hanging up, I finally allowed myself to shatter. I walked to the window, the glow of the suburban street lamps blurring through my tears. My 2 decades with David, the anniversaries, the children's births, the shared dreams, had been built on a foundation of professional manipulation and personal cruelty. David wasn't just a cheat. He was a human predator who had exploited a vulnerable young woman and then terrorized his own orphaned child. I went to the kids' rooms. Ethan was sprawled out, one hand dangling off the bed, his mouth slightly open. Chloe was a perfect, peaceful little cocoon under her duvet. They were my anchors, the only real thing to emerge from the wreckage of my marriage. I sat between their beds until 3 a.m., holding on to the silence, letting the resolution solidify into granite. The next morning, I was a woman on a mission. The first call was to my lawyer. I instructed her to file for divorce immediately, citing adultery and emotional distress, but not before I sent her scanned copies of every single document I had taken from David's safe, along with the detailed report Isabella had left behind, which included her mother's medical records and David's initial threat letter to Isabella. My lawyer, a sharp, seasoned woman named Eleanor, called me back within the hour. "Amelia, this is explosive. This isn't just divorce. This is a career-ending crisis for David. The financial and legal implications are enormous. You are perfectly positioned. You will get everything, including full custody." "I don't care about everything, Eleanor," I said, my voice crisp. "I care about the children and my freedom. And I want David to face accountability for what he did to Claire and Isabella." The media frenzy began that afternoon. The investigative journalist, honoring his promise to Isabella, published his story online. The title screamed, "Architectural Mogul Exposed, Secret Daughter, Hush Money and Corporate Theft Unravel, $500 million Merger." The piece was meticulously detailed, showcasing the legal documents and the audio recording of David's horrified reaction when confronted with his past. David's carefully constructed world imploded in real time. His firm placed him on immediate administrative leave. The merger collapsed. His business partners issued public, horrified statements of disassociation. His name became synonymous with corporate malpractice and moral depravity. He tried to call, text, and email. I blocked everything. He came to the house once, desperate and yelling, but I had already changed the locks and called the police, citing a restraining order based on his documented threats against Isabella, which he was technically still making by trying to intimidate us. He was escorted away, looking less like a powerful executive and more like a desperate, beaten man. A week later, I received a small, unsealed package in the mail. It was postmarked from a city hundreds of miles away. Inside was a small silver locket. I recognized it. It was the one Isabella always wore. Attached was a handwritten note. "Amelia, thank you for listening to the truth. Thank you for choosing justice over convenience. I found a job waiting tables and I'm taking night classes. I'm finally just Isabella, not the secret. The locket belongs to my mother. She kept a picture of the old playground bench inside. Tell your children that their mother is incredibly strong. You don't have to tell them about me yet, but when you do, tell them their father wasn't the man he pretended to be. I hope you find peace." Isabella, I put the locket away in a drawer. It wasn't a piece of evidence, it was a token of shared dark history. Isabella had found her freedom and in doing so had handed me mine. The divorce was swift and brutal for David. He lost his firm, his reputation, and nearly all his assets to legal fees and the eventual civil lawsuit filed by Eleanor on behalf of Claire Thompson's estate. With Isabella's blessing, though she asked for none of the money, only that it be used for women's shelters. He was left with the bare minimum required by law. Life now is quieter. I sold the big house with the wraparound porch. It was too tainted, and bought a smaller, sunnier place closer to the kids' school. I am working again, but I have learned to prioritize time with Ethan and Chloe. I haven't told the children about Isabella yet. They know their father was a bad man who made big mistakes at work, and that we are happier now. That is enough for now. But sometimes, when I watch Chloe coloring or see Ethan laughing with his friends, I remember the intensity in Isabella's eyes. I remember the pain of Claire Thompson's life. And I know the truth. The perfect life is always a lie. The real beauty is in the honesty, no matter how ugly the truth is. David learned that lesson the hardest way possible. And I learned that sometimes the sweetest revenge is simply the truth, delivered by the one person your abuser thought he had silenced forever. Thank you for listening to this difficult confession. We are so grateful to share these stories with you. If this story resonated with you, please hit the like button and share your thoughts in the comments section below.